This is the Anbernic RG slide. All right, so this is a curious one. After a few months at the beginning of the year being somewhat dormant, Anbernic has come out swinging. We got the RG557 earlier this year with its new higher performance chipset, and then we just saw the RG35XX Pro, which is sort of a update of the budget entry level vertical handheld here. Check out my last video for that one. But today we're looking at the RG slide, which is a novel concept. If you are the right age to have remembered the PSP Go, or perhaps like me, you remember the mid-2000s and the beginning of the cell phone era and mass adoption, we saw some slider phones that sort of had, I mean, this almost looks like a phone you could take a call on. So definitely going back to that. So is this a concept that makes sense for a retro handheld? And I think the answer is maybe. I'm not 100% sold on this, so let's dive in and take a look at it. All right, so what is underneath the hood in the RG slide here? We are looking at the Unisoc T820 chip. We've seen this previously in the RG406H, RG406V, and the RG556. And this is a chip that's sort of an interesting medium power chip. It's going to play everything, you know, Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, and under flawlessly, no problems there. And, you know, mostly 3DS, DS, that's going to be fine too. But when we get into the PS2 and GameCube era, this chip falls a little short of the higher powered Snapdragon devices like Retroid and AYN have, and also the 557 with its new Dimensity 8300 chip, I believe, in that one, which is much more capable. However, we can still play a decent amount of GameCube and some PS2, some at 1x, some at 2x, some with tweaks, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the video. But it's a moderate powered chip, and it's plenty for most of the older generations up to and including some of PlayStation 2 and GameCube. It has a 4.7-inch 1280 by 960 120 Hz LTPS LCD screen here. And that has a different tech, I believe, a little bit than IPS, and I think it actually makes it more vibrant and faster refreshing. And this 960p resolution on this 4.7-inch screen is actually pretty amazing, and one of the best things on this handheld. This is the first time Anbernic is using this screen. I'm not sure if the screen is bespoke for only from them or they got it from somewhere else, but wow, this screen is pretty awesome, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. We've got 8 gigabytes of RAM, 120 gigabytes of storage, Android 13 under the hood. It's got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, all those bells and whistles, I believe, up to 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi AC, and it's got a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. The console comes in the white version shown here, as well as a black version. No special fancy colors this time, at least yet. There is an optional case for $10. It is pretty simple and basic, which honestly I kind of prefer because the RG557 came with this red and yellow McDonald's looking case. The 556 had like a Gucci bag, and then there's been some other curious cases they've used. So I've got a simple case. It's not the most robust in the world, but you know, it fits the device and keeps it safe. The nice thing about this being a slider is there's no joystick sticking out when you put it into a case, so you really don't have to worry about that at all. So how much does all of this cost? Well, we are looking at introductory pricing of $189.99. However, it is $10 off for the first 3 days. So it brings it down to $179.99 or $180. I can't put it in my cart and see what the shipping is from Anbernic yet, since it's not actually on sale, but it's probably going to be about $20 for shipping. So we're looking at right around the $200 mark out the door, assuming no other import charges or tariffs on this one. And that's really a curious price point because that puts it into competition with the likes of the Retroid Pocket 5, Retroid Pocket Mini V2, etc., with their Snapdragon chipsets that can handle PlayStation 2 a little bit better than this chip. And they also have OLED screens. So that's sort of curious, but you have to imagine that there is definitely cost involved in this new screen and the sliding mechanism on here. So whether that makes it worth it, if this form factor is appealing to you, then I don't know, maybe that price is worth it. For some people, it might be a little steep for the performance profile that it offers. So let's keep going and check out this device. So doing a quick tour, on the top we've got our L1 and L2 bumpers, and our R2 and R1 bumpers. So these are inline, no analog triggers. They are clicky, not terribly loud, but definitely have a clicky enough noise that somebody's going to notice it. And then across the bottom, we've got a headphone jack, always nice to see. Don't know if this is an indicator light or a microphone or something, can't really tell. And then we've got our USB-C charging point. I was able to charge this using a 65 watt power delivery brick. It doesn't take that much power all at once, but it is nice to not have to worry about just using an A to C cable. It does seem to work with C to C power delivery. On the left side of the device, we've got our micro SD card slot, nothing else there. Only one slot on this since it's an Android device and it has internal storage, so you don't need two micro SD card slots. I've got a power button and volume up and down on the right side. And then on the back, we have a intake, and the exhaust is actually at the bottom, so it actually blows downward. Most handhelds tend to blow up, but I think because of the sliding screen, they don't want all that hot air here, so we do have the exhaust on the bottom. And then around on the front, we've got our two little speaker slots on either side of the screen. This is an all glass front panel here, which does look pretty nice. And then we've got two buttons. This one over here on the right is our back button if you click it once, and our home button if you hold it down. The one on the left, I don't know if a single tap does anything, but holding it down a long press brings up the Anbernic launcher, which I do not use. I think, and let's actually just check really quick right now. If we go into our settings, in handheld console settings, we can change the launcher to ESDE and go back home. Now we're in ESDE. If I hold the button, back to there, hold the button, back to ESDE. Okay, sweet. I didn't set that up before, but now we can use that as a dedicated emulation station launcher. I believe if you install other launchers, you may have other options on that menu, but yeah, that's definitely cool to see, like having that quick access button. And then, of course, we slide it up and we have our other controls here. We've got our D-pad, our two joysticks, our face buttons, and our start and select down here on the bottom. Nothing too crazy there. As far as the finish and feel, I already mentioned that we've got this nice all glass front here. The screen looks beautiful, of course. The plastic is pretty decent, has a nice texture to it. I don't think it'll get too smudgy or dirty. I can't really speak for the black version. The only really thing that I thought about when I was looking at this is there's kind of this ridge here, and then it's not totally flush. I don't even think you'll be able to see it on camera because it's so tiny, but my finger kind of gets caught on that a little bit depending on how I hold it. I'm really nitpicking here. Like this corner isn't 100% flush, but it's well within the manufacturing tolerances of these handhelds. It's not out of league compared to any other handheld, just kind of something I noticed. But it feels solid. It is chunky. I think this is actually 300 something grams, so it's not a light handheld. And it is fairly large. It's not a little slim slider phone like you might think of. It's a chunky boy, and we'll look at some size comparisons later. And then the slide mechanism, of course, the big thing, it feels very robust. I don't have any concerns about this slide mechanism. I could play with this all day long, and yeah, it doesn't feel like there's no slop whatsoever. It doesn't flex at all. You can see here you've got these nice rails, and then I can feel a nice spring tension. So the sliding mechanism is clearly well thought out and not something that I think will give us any problems. So overall, build quality is actually really good on this device. I don't have too much to complain about. So let's jump into the controls on the device and see how they hold up. We're going to pop into the gamepad tester here. As a side note, this screen is very bright. As you can see, I have it turned down quite a bit for it to look good on the camera here. Really nice that it gets bright, but we'll talk about that in the screen section later. All right, as I mentioned, the bumpers are clicky. They work fine. If you do your pull down on the top here and swipe over, you have your Nintendo Switch or Xbox mode, so you can swap the direction of the buttons, and you can choose whether you're only a digital button, a simulation of a full press on an analog trigger, or both. Depending on the emulator or game, different settings might work better, but you have a total customization there. We're going to leave it in the Nintendo mode for actually, let's put it in the Xbox mode because otherwise it's going to look kind of funny. Can't really talk about trigger range or smoothness because they're just digital buttons, so don't need to worry about that. Start and select location, they're not in a bad spot, but they're kind of hard to reach with how wide the device is. Maybe if there was space up here, I don't really know that there's really anywhere else that they could have put them with the design. So they work fine. It's not a big deal. Additional function buttons, we already covered these two up here, which are back and home and our launcher buttons. And then we got our D-pad here. So the D-pad it's nice. It's membrane. You can be gentle and not have diagonals. You can be a little bit more aggressive and have diagonals. It's not so stiff like some where it's hard to hit the diagonals. We can easily roll around the outside here, but I can also just accurately hit a direction. I think the D-pad is pretty good on this one. Don't really have any complaints. It's a decent size, has a decent feeling pivot and membrane. I don't really have too many problems with the D-pads and face buttons on Anbernic devices in general. So yeah, talking about face buttons here, we've got our buttons and they have a nice travel and feel. They're not loud at all. I'm hitting them while I'm talking here and you can probably not even hear them that much on the microphone. No problems. I like these face buttons. And then of course we have our sticks here. So I believe these sticks are the ones we saw introduced on the RG557, which means they are actually very smooth and have a decent range, but they are a pretty small top. Now, I would argue that the RG Slide here is the correct device to use these small sticks on, and that the 557 was maybe the incorrect device. A larger stick on that, I think many would have appreciated. But for the Slide, where you have this clearance and spacing issues, this is actually maybe an ideal stick for a slide format, because as you can see here when I'm using it, it's very accurate. We've got what looks to be very smooth, not a single cardinal snapping issue to be found here. So yeah, these joysticks are actually really good. I like them a lot. They are small, but for this form factor, they make sense. And they're actually some of the most comfortable controls to reach. And we'll talk about that in a little bit in the ergonomics section here. Actually, we were at the ergonomics section, so let's talk about it. When you're holding it like this, it's not bad at all. Double stick games, you've got your fingers up here on the inline triggers, just perfectly fits. You got your index finger kind of holding some weight of the device, and this index finger up here is kind of up against the back of the screen, holding some weight. And in this configuration, it's comfortable. The problem is when you're going to use the face buttons and the D-pad, if you keep this same grip, which is comfortable right now, you then kind of have to jam your thumbs out to the side here. And it's not awful. In fact, I would argue this is no worse than the Retroid Pocket Flip 2, which everybody's in love with, and I sort of had middling feelings about the ergonomics there, and I sort of have middling feelings about the ergonomics here. So I don't think it's bad, and I think honestly, after having this for a few days and playing it more and more, I've found more creative ways to hold it. You know, you can hold it in tighter when you're doing the joystick, but if you're going to play a game that's primarily buttons and D-pad, you can widen your grip a little bit. This works when you're holding it flat, but not so much when you're holding it up. But also, if you don't need the shoulder buttons, you can modify your grip to bring your index finger down around here, and instead of having it up on the grip, to hold it here. And then you can kind of just hold down here, and your thumbs aren't having to bend down as much. Up here, they have to bend down, but if you're holding it here, then it's not so bad. And in fact, you can still reach up and occasionally hit a bumper or trigger. So it just really depends. I think a grip that kind of shifted your hand down a little bit and out would help, but sort of defeats the point of the sliding device. My thumbs actually kind of naturally fall up here, but of course, if you put the controls on the front, again, that would kind of defeat the point of the sliding device. So it is what it is. Overall, I don't think the ergonomics are the worst device I've ever felt, but due to the weight and the kind of balance of the device wanting to tip forward here, it can be just a bit challenging to find the right grip, but I still find it playable. It might just cramp up for extended play sessions depending on the size of your hands and how you hold it. As far as the size of this device, it is a chunky boy, so let me grab some other devices to kind of give you an idea. First up here, I have the original, the Game Boy DMG, and you can see here that these are nearly identical in width and height. In fact, they're like 90% the same there. The Game Boy DMG is slightly thicker, but again, it's really similar. So if you've ever held one of these as a kid, you'll know that this is kind of a similar size. Not everybody has a Game Boy DMG, so let's show a few other things. I've got the RG35XX Pro that Anbernic just released here. You know, this is a little taller than like a Miu Mini Plus or the original RG35XX XX Plus. XX 2024, etc. But you can get an idea that's a little taller than a standard 3.5-inch handheld, and definitely considerably thicker, especially considering the part with just the screen. Compared to a small handheld, I've got the Trim UI Brick here. You can see that this is a much more pocketable device, much slimmer, so it's not really something you want to stick in your pocket. It's kind of heavy too. I wouldn't want that pulling my pants down or anything. And then here's an OEM device, PS Vita. You can see here that it is actually narrower than the PS Vita, and it's about the same height. It is definitely thicker than a Vita. Sadly, I don't have a PSP Go, which would be cool to show next to this, or even a PSP. I just have my Vita. But I believe that the screen on this it's definitely bigger than a PSP Go. But even compared to a normal PSP, I think it's actually about the same width. So even though you might have bars on the top and bottom, it's about the same display area as a PSP. And the screen, while not OLED, is still a lot sharper than the Vita for something like a PSP game or other emulation. Vita is still the best way to play Vita, but for everything else, I would definitely pick this up over it. All right, so now we've had a chat about kind of the physical aspects. Let's look at this screen. And I've already mentioned that this screen is really good. This is ranking up there in non-OLED screens that I've reviewed since I started my journey, or even stuff I didn't review and have just personally had. This is super vivid and it's super crisp. It's got nice contrast. It's detailed. The 1280 by 960 resolution is very sharp at this size. Let me pull something up, or let's even just look at the wallpaper here. Let's get a close-up shot. There's a little bit of weird artifacts going on from the way the camera films it, but you can see that this is very, very crisp and punchy looking screen on this device. So let's pull up a game here and you can kind of take a look at what it looks like in game and see how nice that is. It's also 120 hertz, which doesn't matter a whole lot for retro, although you can do BFI or black frame insertion with the 120 hertz display in RetroArch. And since the screen gets quite bright, you can actually compensate for that dimness. The screen would be really good for shaders as well, because it's so bright, it can overcome any dimming artifacts, or sorry, not artifacts, but like dimming that would occur from use of a shader. So here's an example of a game. I've got Dead Cells here, which is a nice and vivid game, and it looks pretty dang good on this screen. We'll just play around a little bit, and yeah, this is kind of a sneak peek of Android gaming on here. And since this is a 120 hertz screen and this is a native Android game with unlockable frame rate, you actually get a very smooth motion. You're not going to really see it on camera today as I'm only filming in 30 frames per second, but you can take my word for it. This is a very smooth feeling native Android gameplay experience on this. So that's another use case for this handheld, besides just the retros, is Android gaming, and we'll maybe look at a little bit of that before we're done with our video today. But yes, this screen is very good. And because it's a higher resolution, it is a pretty good option if you want to stick to integer scaling. This screen with the 960p, I mean, that's double of 480p. So if there's any console that outputs 640 by 480 or 320 by 240, those are all going to perfectly scale onto here. There are some consoles that are slightly off in the way they output, but the black borders are going to be pretty minimal because of how large the resolution is. And maybe I'll show that here in a second. And yeah, I don't know. I could go on about the screen, but it's very nice, very vivid. It's great for this. I really want Anbernic to use the screen more. Might be a little big for a vertical, but I'd like to see a non-clamshell version of this that just has the controls on the sides. I think there's rumored maybe an RG477 or 407M of some sort. I'm not necessarily huge on the metal, but maybe another plastic handheld like this, an updated version of the RG406H, call it the RG407H or the 477H. Put the Dimensity 8300 in it, plus this screen, and that could be a pretty winning combo. Because not everybody wants a 16:9 screen. This is really good for 4.3 content. Anyways, I'll stop gushing about the screen and we'll move on, and we'll talk about audio. Yes, it has speakers, and that might be the nicest I can say about it at the moment. It is not, it's fine. Here, well, just take a listen for yourself. There's no bass. there's a lot of treble. It's not super offensive, I guess. I mean, it can be harsh with kind of rock music, as you just heard on one of my tracks, but it's kind of just, yeah, it's trebly. I wish there was a bit more warmth to it. Maybe some EQ or something like that could tame the treble on it. It's a shame because we've got front firing speakers here. I don't know why handheld manufacturers have such a problem with speakers that sound half decent. Anyways, the audio exists. It's got a headphone jack, which is the best thing I can say about the audio, actually, even more so than it just exists. Okay, so what does it play? Well, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to play all the classic systems just fine. And let me show you what that looks like in terms of the integer scaling and how that looks on this device. Okay, so as far as scaling goes, here is a Super Nintendo game at full screen, non-integer scaled, and then let's see what that looks like when we hop over to integer scaling real quick here. We lose just a little bit, but it's not a big deal. I would say that this screen is high enough resolution that most of the time I'm not bothered by being non-integer scaled, but there are some games where you might see some artifacts, and if that annoys you, you can turn integer scaling on. Of course, not really an issue with 3D games, but we still get a pretty nice sized space or size here with the integer scaling turned on. And of course, that's going to vary system to system. Some systems are not going to have much space loss at all. Let's just check out something else while we're here. Let's pop in a Game Boy Color game and see what that looks like. So here's Game Boy Color integer scaled. You can see that there's a little bit of border around the outside here. Still a nice big picture. And then if we turn off integer scaling, then we get a nice big picture here. We do have a little bit of black bars just because of the aspect ratio of Game Boy Color. But man, look at, even without integer scaling on, those pixels, they're crisp. I mean, it looks nice. There's a lot of punch to this screen, and it really does bring these games to life. I can't complain about it. All right, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on the 2D games because they're all going to run fine. So let's hop over to 3D World and look at 3DS, which is on sort of the higher end of systems, but below PS2 and GameCube, and show what that looks like here. And I started Star Fox 64 3D last night, so let's pull that back up here. Gyro controls do actually work, but I didn't particularly love using them, but you can see my viewpoint in the background shifting. Anyways, so here we've got 3DS playing Star Fox 64, and it runs real well. I'm on, I think, 2x upscale. It looks very crisp and colorful on the screen. You can kind of get an idea of how that 3DS content displays. I'm going to pause real quick and kind of cycle through. So if you got full screen, it's very big, large, crisp. Got a little bit of black bars because I think we're at 5:3 on the 3DS or 3:2, something like that. Not quite a 4:3 aspect ratio, but not quite 16:9. And then side by side, obviously too small. Both screens on the side, still a bit small. Here's a stacked with a larger bottom screen, and then we'll go back to that first one, which I think is the best one. Then I have it set so I can swap screens on the left stick here. So it's still usable, and actually it's detailed enough that I didn't have too much issue pressing the buttons down here on the bottom screen if I needed to. So not a big deal, and 3DS is definitely a good match here. 3DS is a clamshell and this is a slider, but I can kind of see there being a little bit of similarity in the way it kind of feels with the screen being higher up on the device. So yeah, a good match for 3DS. So that's enough of this stuff. Let's jump over to the heavier hitting stuff and see how that all runs. So in Dolphin here, let's take a look at my settings. I am at a internal resolution of 2x native, which is 1280 by 1056. So perfect for this display. It's actually a few pixels taller. But yeah, we don't really need to go up to 3x native. It does run some games there, but we're going to stick with 2x for our testing here because that is what we need to push this display. And let's just pop in to a level and see how that performs. All right, so as you can see for GameCube here at a 2x scale, no issues at all running Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. Not necessarily the hardest game to run for this console, but still just going to show that we do have decent performance on tap here. It might not be as good as some others, but we can totally play GameCube outside of the more difficult titles. Apologies, I'm absolutely sucking at this game while talking, but yeah, Doesn't matter whether you're good at it or not, it does run just fine. GameCube looks excellent in Tony Hawk here, so let's take a look at something else. All right, so I got Super Smash Bros. Melee up here now. One thing I noticed about this game is that it runs fine in match, but some of the menus can chug a little bit, although it doesn't seem to be happening right now, so maybe it'll make a liar out of me. Let's just pull that up and see how we go. Okay, it's running fine right now. Maybe it was a fluke the other night. Nope, there you go. See, you kind of had a choke for a second, but then we're back to running just fine. And yeah, you know, I'm not a Super Smash Brothers expert, but I can at least beat the CPU on very easy. And as you can see at the top right, the maximum speed, we do still have a little bit of headroom here at 2x, so it's not too bad at all. So I'd say for GameCube, it's going to be a good time overall. And this is a very crisp screen. It looks awesome. In fact, let me show a picture on screen right now that I took on my cell phone, which is Wind Waker on this, and then side by side with the Virtual Console edition on the Switch 2. And you notice that it actually, in my opinion, looks better on the slide than it does on the Switch 2 because of how vibrant and crisp that screen is. So yeah, take a look at that real quick. So GameCube, yeah, that's a good one. So let's move on to PS2, which is where we're going to start to struggle a little bit on this one and see how that plays out. So I'm just going to cut straight to the chase and load a harder game here, and that's God of War. And we are only running at 1x resolution here. And as you can see, there's still some mild slowdowns. This is not a game that the device can handle running at 2x particularly well. You see we get some 47 FPS. And I think I actually have a mild underclock on as well to make sure that the times where it does dip down a little bit don't affect the frame rate too badly. Again, not very good at playing and talking at the same time, but as you can see, God of War 2 is playable. There are just going to be some dips. And let's just double check my settings here. We are looking at a mild underclock on the EE cycle skip. And then for graphics settings, we are at 1x native multiplier here. So yes, it's going to play a PS2 at 1x for the most part, but let's take a look at a game that's an example of it running a little bit better, and that was Gran Turismo. I played around with that one. Let's double check our graphics settings on this one. It's not set here. Let me hit 2x, and then we're not using any underclock or anything like that. And let's load up our save state. I forgot to save a state, so let's just get into the game. You can hear the fan kicking in already on this one. So you can actually see at 2x here, we were slightly under 60 frames per second. We're hovering right there at like 57. I think it depends on how many cars are on the screen. But yes, this can play some games at near 60. I could probably put on a mild underclock to smooth that out. No problems at all playing this one on 1x, but yeah, 2x, 1x, that's kind of what we're looking at on PS2 games on this. They're certainly playable, and it looks perfectly fine. It looks great and sharp at 2x. Even 1x is okay if you use like a scanline or CRT filter maybe, but I personally don't love playing PS2 at 1x, so I wouldn't buy this as a PS2 handheld. You're better off with something like the Retroid Pocket 5 Mini V2 or Flip 2 if PS2 is your jam, or even stepping up to something bigger like the Odin 2 or Odin 2 Portal, Odin 2 Mini. Those are all better PS2 choices. You know, a lot of INU devices as well will do that. You can see here we're slowing down to, like 30 frames per second there. This is one of the trickier parts of the game to render. So playable, but 2x is kind of pushing the limits for the most part on PS2. Now I'm going to pivot straight from this into talking about heat because I can feel it right now. This device does get warm under load, and I can feel it right in this area here behind my fingers. It's not really on the edges, and there's a little bit in the front here, but like right around here and here, I can feel warmth on the back. And this is with the high mode and the fan on auto. Again, the exhaust is coming out down here. It's not uncomfortably hot. It's plastic, so it's absorbing most of it, but I will say that it is noticeable. There are times where I'm playing this and I'm thinking, ooh, that's kind of hot. Granted, it's the summertime here in California and it's like 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside, so I'm a little sensitive to things being hot. It probably feels nice in the wintertime if you live somewhere in a cold climate, as well, maybe. But yes, it does generate some heat. And yes, the fan does generate some noise. Let's turn this up to the max speed so you can hear what that sounds like. Now here's me talking. My microphone's about the same distance from the device it is from my mouth. Here I am whispering as a comparison. ASMR. So maybe you can tell it's not super loud on its own. There is a bit of a high-pitched undertone that I hear on mine. It can be kind of annoying. From across the room, somebody probably won't hear it, but if they're next to you, they might be kind of annoyed by it. It's not as forceful as some fans, but you can definitely hear it. Now, on a lower mode, they just call it cool. Can't really hear it that much. It's not that loud. And on auto, it just depends on what you're playing. I think for lower end stuff, it's not going to bother you, but playing PS2 there, yeah, it's a little toasty on the bottom here, and you do hear the fan a little bit. So again, another reason that maybe PS2 is not a perfect match for this device. Of course, the screen is nice and cool because it's in a separate area entirely, but yes, the backside does get a little bit warm from time to time. Oh, I just love. That's the best part of the device. Is that worth $200 to just do this all day? Probably not, but it's fun nonetheless. Okay, so kind of skipped over to the heat, temperature, fan kind of section there. I haven't had enough time yet with this to really comment on battery life. When I started filming about an hour ago, I was at like, I don't know, 68, 69%. I'll put that number on the screen, and we're at 55% now. And so we'll figure out after an hour how much the battery's dropped. I'll put the text on the bottom here and say how many percent it dropped in 1 hour. I'm not actively playing a game the whole time, but you see I've been doing all sorts of different stuff with it. So it might give you a general idea of what battery life could look like on the device. So hopping back over to games, I want to talk about native Android games for a second. You did see me playing Dead Cells and there was no issue there, but let's pop into some other Android games to see if that is a use case that you might like. It is kind of like a phone. So on one hand, for touchscreen games, you could still use it like a phone in that aspect, and then you could pop it open for controller games. Maybe. I don't know. I guess at that point you could just use an Android phone, but this is pretty nice. Pretty nice screen. You know, I don't know. You do you. When I was a kid, games didn't have to download updates every single time you played them. All right, so here we got Zenless Zone Zero. Just wanted to hop in real quick. I'm not going to play a ton. It forgets my controller, so hey, you could have it like this, and you could play it like a phone if you wanted to. So there's that. But let's pop the menu open and put it back into controller mode. I don't know why it never remembers this. Options, input, UI layout, controller, pop it open, bada bing, bada boom. There you go, we're on controller. So as you can see, I had a little hiccup there. I think I'm on like a mix of medium settings, but high frame rate. And yeah, I think to my naked eye, it's more than 30 frames per second. I don't know if it's 60 frames per second or not, but the game runs perfectly fine. So this chipset, it's got enough juice to play some Android games in it. Oh, a little bit of a skip there. Could probably turn it down a little bit to get rid of some of those hiccups, but yeah, it runs, so not a huge deal there. I don't know if Zenless Zone Zero is the game that I would pick this handheld for. Call of Duty Mobile, I don't even really play that much, but everybody always wants to know how it runs. I will let you know right now that controls do not work natively, because Call of Duty is very picky about controller implementation. Pretty much only works with like a Bluetooth controller, and the devices where it works with the built-in controller are usually using some sort of spoofing. But we do have Anbernic's screen mapping with some built-in profiles here, so let me show you how that works out after I get past 1,700 daily offers, loot crates, and other things. So right now, no controls. We're going to swipe down from the top. We're going to long press on key mapping, switch. That what I need to hit? Yeah, there we go. Okay, got key mapping working here. So let's see, we can, yeah, it works pretty well overall. It's not quite as good as native controller, but it is nice that we have some built-in software mapping. And yeah, Call of Duty Mobile runs just fine. Honestly, I think this game could probably run on a potato phone at this point, but if you want some 4-3 Call of Duty action, then hey, RG Slide can do it. And then one other kind of gaming related thing I wanted to talk about is streaming. You might think that this would be a silly device to do streaming on. It's not widescreen, but the screen is 120 hertz and it actually gets pretty good decode latency times in moonlight. So let me show you what that looks like. If you ever woke up in the morning and thought to yourself, man, I wish I could play Cyberpunk 2077 on a slider handheld on a 4:3 screen? No? Just me? Well, if you have thought that, you're in luck, because this screen is actually really cool for streaming. We can see here we got a 5 millisecond decode time. Let me see if I can get that part in a little bit of focus here. And I think it gets even a little bit faster if we go into high performance mode. We can see we're dropping down under 4 milliseconds on the decode time. You know, the side effect is I'm filming right now, I'm far away from this, so it's kind of hard to see what I'm doing. But yeah, streaming on this is actually kind of cool. Oh, surprise cat appearance. Hi, Buster. The high refresh screen here really does help streaming, and it looks pretty excellent. So yeah, in a pinch, this is certainly a use case. And dual joysticks is one of the most comfortable ways to play the slide. Actually, this is ergonomically not that bad to play it this way. So yeah, just something to keep in mind in your back pocket. Have a back pocket streamer, literally. I wouldn't buy it for this. You know, it's a small screen, but for some games, it can be kind of fun. Well, I think at this point, I've told you pretty much everything I have to say about the RG Slide. It's a competent handheld. It's got some ergonomic challenges. It's got a fun sliding mechanism, but it also has some ergonomic and weight balance issues. It is a bit chunky. There might be better options for specific use cases, but where else are you going to get a sliding retro handheld? I mean, that's really what the appeal is here. At $200 though, again, I mentioned the price could be a little hard. There are other $200 devices with better performance, but if you don't care about PlayStation 2 or Switch emulation and you just want to play GameCube and retro games and you want that slider concept, well, you know, maybe this isn't bad. There are certainly way cheaper things that can play most of the same stuff, but not with the screen and not with the slider form factor. I'll let you be the judge of whether this is something you're interested in. Personally, if I hadn't been sent this as a review unit, which yes, by the way, Anbernic did send this to me at no charge. They're not paying me anything other than just this value of the device that I get. And they're not seeing the video before it goes live or anything like that. No input or direction provided from them. But yes, I did get it. If I was going to spend my own $200, would I pick this over something else? I'm going to say probably not, but that's because I like OLED screens a lot. There are other devices out there, and I have a lot of devices already, so I don't know that I would pick this one over the others. But is it Buster approved? Anyways, if you want to find me, I'm just going to be sitting here at my desk doing this all day long. How many ways can I slide this open?